I think that's really in that time of adversity when DEI, as it is most often conceptualized today, ends up creating tension. Now, if you kind of shift that perspective a little bit, right, and you consider DEI not as reaching out to someone who needs help, but recognizing that oftentimes when you are bringing in a diverse set of people, they may have faced adversity themselves, meaning they come in with useful skills. They're not coming in and you're giving them a handout. They're coming in with grit, adaptability, skills that are actually extremely useful under time of distress because they have navigated difficulties in their life. And so I think if you kind of apply that mind shift to DEI, you also happen to shift that perspective from being something that is a luxury and takes away resources to something that can supplement your highest performing workers.
What's up, creative critters? It's your boy, Eugene Choi.
I'm Jonathan.
And this is Michael.
And welcome to the Pample Pod, the show with candid conversations and creative chaos. So today's big question that I want the three of us to dive right into is how does a company create a truly positive culture? So, there is that saying where you can bring a horse to a river, but, you can't make that horse drink the water, so to speak. So, we talk about how we want to create this open and welcoming environment where people really do feel comfortable trying new things and not feel like they're being pressured to deliver good results on a strict timeline or because we're going to punish people because they screwed up with something. But I want to ask, is there even like a step zero to all of this where just you need to have this environment that is quote unquote positive? But I know it's a broad question, so maybe we could first look at how does the industry define what is a positive work culture, a positive environment, so to speak? So I want to hear from you guys.
Yeah, sure. I think that when I think about kind of the term positive work culture, one thing that immediately comes to mind is what people call work-life balance, or like how much of your waking hours does work take up? Does it have clear boundaries? When you go home for the day, are you still responding to emails and replying to texts from your boss? Are you staying late or working on weekends? Mm-hmm. I think that's one component that gets brought up a lot because a lot of people are working either too many hours or like hours at times they don't want to be, or they're half working during their free time. But I think being a positive culture, at least in my mind, has to do kind of with two things. One is that when you have some amount of work that you want to get done, the work culture is sort of like a multiplier on how much stress that work generates for you and how much of your energy it takes up. So there's a lot of ways that can manifest. But for example, if you're in a culture where backstabbing or kind of like vying for power or office politics is common, then writing the same report is going to take a lot more energy because you're trying to safeguard your ideas from your coworkers. And if your boss is like getting on to you about timelines, it's adding a lot of stress. Mm-hmm. So I really like to think about work culture as if you're trying to accomplish a task, does the work culture make it easier to accomplish? Like, do you have a support system you can rely on? Or does it make it more difficult to accomplish?
Yeah, and I was going to jump on what you were saying too, because I think it's kind of a great way to frame it. When you're asking Eugene about sort of how, I guess, industry frames a positive work culture, you'll hear some of the usual suspects like having psychological safety, for example, for workers or employees, alignment with the company goals, for example, or empowerment, whatever form that may mean. It could be, I guess, for personal growth, for example, within the company. But all these are kind of rooted in sort of an assumption of positivity with what sort of initial conditions you're starting with. And I think that the way you frame it is a little more adaptive, let's put it this way, where, you're not necessarily starting in a positive place. And I think positivity in work culture really shines in difficult times. And I think that's sort of the distinguishing feature, at least in how I think of positivity at work as well, is that it's should also be there for you when things are difficult and stressful. And I think that's where you can really distinguish a true and genuine positive work culture, not just when things are fine, right? And yeah.
Right. So on the topic of having this team that you can rely on in moments of good times, but also bad times and adversity, I do want to connect positive work culture with one of the hiring trends I think that we've had for a while, which is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, a lot of people listening to this could have different ideas of what DEI means to them, and we could explore that for a minute here with the three of us here. But I think the gist of DEI, the intention was that you want to create a team that is quote unquote holistic, or like, all encompassing. You don't want to just hire a specific demographic. You don't want to penalize someone who's applying for a company based on their own fundamental characteristics, who they are as a person, their gender, ethnicity, things like that. So I think the intention with DEI was good. But now you're starting to have this shift in culture where companies are rolling back their DEI policies. I've talked to people at SpaceX where like that's happening, especially now on the news. You have Facebook as well. Mark Zuckerberg is pulling back their DEI policies as well. So I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are on that. Feel free to address anything with the DEI. Do you think DEI on its own has intrinsic value? And if so, maybe what has companies been doing wrong with it so that we're in this reality that we're living in today right now?
I have a soapbox to get on that one, I guess, if I for a minute.
Here we go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, so I think, in terms of the value, I think there is clear value to just, get that out up front. There is merit in terms of how that diversity can help with innovation and decision making as well. You're inviting broader perspectives into a company, and to me that has value. It's also, by way of having that diversity, you also form more empathy in the company, and by virtue of having that empathy, it can help the team within itself, especially tying it back to our previous conversations. When things are difficult, that's where you can kind of think of almost an investment in your own emotional training as a whole, as a team. And so, especially in those time of difficulties, I think that's where it can shine. And then there is a resilience and adaptability aspect to it. And that's where maybe the soapbox part starts, because to your point about people rolling back the DEI policies, right, which is on the news right now,
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the, and I'll just engage my own perception and assumptions here, but one of the things I imagine might be the cause of that is that when people think of DEI, they often approach it with a helping the others, almost like a paternalistic approach.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of have a savior group who's coming in and helping the other poor person who doesn't have the skills, and you're kind of handing him a free lunch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you do have some people who have, kind of a more nuanced and sophisticated view of that, but generally there is kind of that perspective of you're helping a group, right, with that sort of savior mentality. The thing with that is that automatically puts DEI in a sort of a luxury that you can afford when things are good. And then when things are bad, I suspect it creates tensions among teams, because now you'll have high performers wondering, hey, why are we allocating resources to others, right? We've maybe all seen this sort of image of a fence with 3 people and people can't see over the fence. And if people haven't seen this image, maybe we can put in the link somewhere.
You're talking about, yeah.
Where you have equality, people have the same box to stand on, but one person being shorter still can't see over the fence. And then you have equity defined as giving that shorter person more boxes, maybe it's a child, so that everyone can see above the fence, right? And I think everyone understands that image when things are calm. Now, if you set the fence on fire, to stay on your fire metaphor, that's, I think, when things break down and people don't understand, hey, why are you giving more boxes to that person when you should be either running away from the fence or giving more boxes to the person who can hop over the fence more effectively and go get help, right? So I think that's really, in that time of adversity, when DEI, as it is most often conceptualized today, ends up creating tension. Now, if you kind of shift that perspective a little bit, right, and you consider DEI not as reaching out to someone who needs help, but recognizing that oftentimes when you are bringing in a diverse set of people, they may have faced adversity themselves, meaning they come in with useful skills. They're not coming in and you're giving them a handout. They're coming in with grit, adaptability, skills that are actually extremely useful under time of distress because they have navigated difficulties in their life. And so I think if you kind of apply that mind shift to DEI, you also happen to shift that perspective from being something that is a luxury and takes away resources to something that can supplement your highest performing workers. Because, maybe your highest performing workers are great at exploiting a resource, but under difficult times, if they're have a high expertise, maybe they have a harder time thinking outside the box. And that's where you get that richness through diversity. And so it's probably the end of the soapbox there, but that's where I think, in short, it does bring value, but there's a certain, oftentimes a mindset that I see associated with it. And I think it's that mindset that leads to that breakdown under difficult times. So with the sort of shift in perspective, I think you can resolve that, or at least kind of see it under another light.
I think reframing it that way, I think is, you articulated that really well, much better than I think I could have. But that DEI is not something that steals value from a company, but it adds value to a company and to a team. And it allows you to have a broader palette of experience and adaptability and more vantage points to approach a problem.
Yeah, because I think it comes back to that same bias we were talking initially about what creates a positive work culture. And if you sort of have that de facto assumption that things are positive, or if you kind of define everything in the context of things going well, you do end up with that sort of take. Whereas if you kind of go in, and maybe I'm too much of a realist sometimes, but if you go in thinking, oh, well, things are going to be difficult, plans always change, things rarely go according to plan, which is something you brought up. Like that's when, just like the positivity in work culture, that's where it really shines, to have the DEI aspect, I think.
I would imagine if you're a new hire at a company, sure, you can see red flags. Oh, maybe your manager is a micromanager. When you first join a company, you probably can't really tell if it's a positive or negative work environment, so to speak, or work culture. You could really tell during those times of adversity. Maybe your company is going through a drought period. You're not being able to sell to enough customers for a XYZ product that you're selling. Or maybe you're going through internal drama. Maybe there is some unfortunate harassment issue between coworkers, or there is a conflict between two teammates. Maybe there's a miscommunication. Maybe there is a horrible, maybe backstabbing issue like you brought up before, Jonathan. That really puts people on the test. It puts people on the edge. How do they respond to a high stress environment like that as well? So kind of hopefully encapsulating the points that you brought, Michael, on your soapbox, so to speak. So really great points that Jonathan and Michael that you've brought up, and definitely a lot of food for thought that I would like us to continuously think about moving forward as a team. And for anyone listening too, I do want to put ourselves on the spot, so to speak, right now as a team. How do we define what a positive work culture is within the three of us, and with more people that do come in? We do have what we call the 9 Pample principles that sort of define how we run, how we do things internally. But I do wonder, I want to open up the floor to you guys, if you have a short or any definition on that.
Yeah, no, happy to jump in. And I like that you tied it to the 9 principles that we have, because to me, that notion of positive work culture is deeply embedded in that one, especially 3 of them that you mentioned off the start. But this, kind of like we were saying before, to me, a positive work culture is less about what you do during good times. Obviously, you should do good things during good times, right? It goes without saying, but it's also more about how you handle those difficulties. And so the 3 notions I brought up earlier, I think were team first, the freedom to do great work, and then the honest conversations principles that we have in there. And so the team first principle is really about having that ability to show up for each other when things are difficult, right? It's about providing that respect and that support for each other. I think it goes well with your point that you're mentioning, Jonathan, of, if you have an environment where you're backstabbing each other when things are difficult because you're trying to get to the top, it really goes against that principle. And so hopefully that's one way that we can sort of add some balance to that when there is tension. The freedom to do great work principle is about being able to give people that trust and autonomy in essentially allowing them to lean into their strengths as well, whatever form that takes, right? Whether that's that adaptability or that grit, or just encouraging bold ideas. If you don't have that, I don't think you're really encouraging the diversity of experience and thoughts that you have on the team. Now, to be able to do that, to encourage that diversity and have that freedom to do great work, I think the 3rd principle is kind of a necessity, that having the honest conversations, because it's about having that culture of transparency to enable essentially not just for people to understand why they're doing things, which is something we've brought up in the last few episodes, but also having that sort of psychological safety or security in being able to admit when mistakes were made, for example, right? It also kind of starts there. And being able to, along with that, address challenges openly, right? I think that you can still address challenges in a respectful manner, but I think it's important to have very open and transparent conversations around that. And all that together, so the team first, the freedom to do great work, and the ability to have those honest conversations all together, to me, help secure that positive work culture in times of adversity. And that's, I think, one of the most important times when you need that positive work culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And even going back to those principles, I think that there's so many ways to look at them. I think one thing that is important to capture too is that when it comes to having honest conversations, it helps to keep the kind of the goal of the team, like the mutual thing that we're all working towards, keeping that objective in focus. I think having honest conversations really helps with that. Because if you have, let's say, like a manager who's not very transparent, it can be hard to see like why you're being given the work that you are, or what you're really working towards, or what the point of any of it is, especially when things don't seem to be going well. So having those honest conversations, like focusing on that principle, can both help the whole team course correct away from when things are going bad, to try to figure out what's going wrong and how can we fix it, and kind of keeping ego out of the conversation and focusing more on what's happening and why, but also really builds a sense of, camaraderie and shared objective that I think is really important to having the team, be a positive influence on each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, especially, to your point of kind of understanding why there is a change. I mean, when ego is getting in the way, when you've put tremendous amounts of effort in some work and now all of a sudden you're being asked to pivot or change, I mean, it feels like you're kind of being robbed of your efforts, and it can be frustrating. You may want to advocate to stay on that course, even if there may be no reason, just purely out of ego because of all the sunk costs that's been invested. So having that ability to be transparent and explain why, even if the why is not necessarily always pleasant, that becomes, to your point, Jonathan, extremely important, being able to communicate, whether it's through leadership or management or at every level, really, to be able to keep that cohesiveness. Because again, it's much easier to have those conversations when everyone's happy, but when emotions are tied in, that's when having that as a real skill that the company is buying into and developing, that's when it really matters.
Now that we kind of have an idea of what a positive culture looks like, how do you get there? Like, how do you encourage this sort of culture to form? I think keeping to those principles is important, but you also have to keep kind of like each person's game theory in mind. Like, I think that the incentive structure matters a lot when it comes to encouraging a healthy culture. Like, in a lot of these large companies, I was just thinking kind of as a thought experiment. If every employee within, like, let's say some corporation were to work 10% harder, would they see a benefit from that, like a year from now?
Yeah.
Like, I think the fact of the matter is that a lot of the times they wouldn't. Like, if everyone starts performing better, that money is going to just be pocketed into the CEO or like whoever's like the executive board. Whereas like if one person was, say, to work 10% better and they also made everyone else work 10% worse, they would get promoted or they would see personal gain for themselves.
I really like your notion of bringing game theory into this, because I think it's one that's really important. And it really does go into the question of, beyond having those principles, we look at how do you actually go about implementing them. And I think really the key is that game theory. I liked your example. For example, you talked about boundaries earlier and working on the weekend. And that's something that, I think about. For some reason, I was thinking about it the other day. I was thinking, like, if obviously you're the founder, you have a high equity stake in the company, you probably don't mind working weekends, right? In some sense, because you're deeply invested. But when you think about people who have either smaller equity shares or are employees down the line, why would they care, essentially? And so sometimes you'll see, initially you think you're doing well, and you're maybe starting up as a startup where you have equity. The first few people who join have equity, so you kind of get in that mentality of, okay, everyone's happy to work on weekends for that reason. Then you sort of end up with that bias happening slowly but surely, until eventually you get to a point where the employees coming in no longer have that same alignment in incentives, but you still have that mentality of working nonstop on weekends and trying to impose that on people who no longer have the aligned incentive scheme to go with that. And that's where you start developing. I don't think people necessarily go with, at least not always, nefarious intent of, let's like crack the whip and make everyone work all the time. I think sometimes it's just they take their own experience and what they're feeling and sort of extrapolate that to everyone, perhaps meaning well, or at best, just kind of with some ignorance. But then the end result is you have poor boundaries, for example. Being able to pause and look at what the game theory says and why should someone care. To your point, I've often heard from even previous bosses, like, hey, like no one on their deathbed is going to wish, they've worked harder for their boss typically, right? They're going to wish they've spent more time doing other things. So I think that goes well with that notion of, make sure how you align things. Are you rewarding time? We had talked on a previous podcast about idolizing the grind, right? It kind of ties into that as well. Are you rewarding time put in just for the sake of putting in time, or are you rewarding yield, right, or that effectiveness? Similarly here are you rewarding good behavior, essentially?
Yeah.
Are you rewarding backstabbing someone else to get that promotion, or are you rewarding like maybe a collective objective, for example?
I think that it's important that what's good for the company is good for the individual too.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you get kind of this interesting circumstance where like what I should do is I should take some course of action that overall hurts the culture or hurts the company, but it gives me an individual benefit. And when everyone's in that mindset, it can quickly devolve into just kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you sort of end up with an individualistic mindset, which is can lead to sometimes problematic behavior as well. It's good to recognize and honor the individual, but then when it comes to I guess the overall performance, there is such a thing as taking it too far and overly rewarding the one individual as if they single-handedly, for example, completed a whole engineering project, when in reality, like most things in life, it was probably a whole team with a whole bunch of support at all levels. And so, a more balanced than nuanced answer in reality, most likely.
Mm-hmm. So as we, unless anyone else has any final thoughts to share, as we transition into the next segment here, just wanted to try to encapsulate the main key points we've talked on. We covered a lot of great points here, but kind of like how to answer that main question, how can a company create a positive work culture? It's about trying to set these boundaries between employees, companies, work expectations. Also, so that's like 1. 2 would probably be like strategically setting a team up for success in times of adversity, as we've discussed already. And then also 3, upholding respectful soft skills, such as being transparent with each other, having honest conversations, and also being able to let go of personal ideas, not falling victim to that sunk cost fallacy, as you mentioned, Michael. And probably 4, kind of going back to that game theory that Jonathan introduced, is being able to align the interests of the entire team, as well, making sure everyone is being rewarded for what the company upholds. Definitely.
Yeah, that's a great summary, I think.
So, on that note, let's move on to Thanks Mom, where we are going to be at the mercy of Mom to create 2 random words, and we'll see what we can create with that in terms of business and potential venture. So,
let's see what good business case.
Yeah,
hopefully it's better than the last one.
Yeah.
If anyone curious, tune into the previous episode to see what that was about. Alrighty, let's see. Mom, what do you have for us? Okay, Nebula spoon.
Nebula spoon.
Just go up into the galaxy and scoop out some of the primordial sludge.
It pairs well with the Milky Way.
Yeah, how do you eat the Milky Way? Using a nebula spoon.
Classic. Just when you thought you could have a spoon big enough for your cereal, here comes the Nebula spoon. For me, Nebula spoon, and this, I don't want to take the credit, it's an idea that's already out there, but when I'm thinking of Nebula, I'm thinking of sort of random motion a little bit, and then with the spoon, I'm thinking of a cool product, and I forget who makes it, for patients with Alzheimer's, where essentially it's a spoon that's stabilized. So when you have different issues with motor skills, and it's hard to have a sort of a stable hand, essentially it's sort of a much larger spoon. The end of it is essentially stabilized like you would a camera system, for example, like you're filming, to help people in their daily life. So when I think Nebula spoon, that immediately is what came to mind. Already an existing product, so we're not inventing anything here, but that probably could be a great product name for something like that.
I was thinking maybe this could be a gimmick, but you can have a restaurant that offers food, but at the same time it has like a those star domes things, like
I know what you're talking about.
What are those called? Like those, it's like a dome you can walk into, but it's like the stars and stuff.
It's not an observatory. It's a
No, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, and the name is like slipping my mind right now.
It's where you project like stars from the night sky up onto the dome, so you can view them.
Something like that. The word completely eludes me. I just remember because I think La La Land had a scene where you had the two main characters doing something there. But I'm also thinking maybe you can do something with astronomy, with Nebula spoon, some sort of gimmick, capturing a group of stars, a constellation in one area, I guess like a telescope or something. I mean, that's what spoons do. Like, they just, you pick up whatever you want from it.
There's something to the idea of the spoon being metaphorical, sort of being able to grab several objects, whether literally or metaphorically, like a sort of knapsack type algorithm. You just kind of cluster everything, being able to, maybe in its simplest form, it is an algorithm that helps sort of cluster things together and recognize that when you have several disparate things together, hey, it's not just, one person, you can kind of recognize that as a group rather than individual recognition.
I can see how this could just be its own like clustering algorithm or something. It doesn't have to be with stars or anything. Just because you have the adjective nebulous, so something that's confusing or something. So you try and make sense of this. Yeah. So some sort of algorithm that could organize or make clusters of things, like a K cluster or something, like to your point. Yeah.
I sort of like Eugene's idea for an astronomy-themed restaurant. Yeah.
My mind went for some reason to a restaurant initially. I thought
all the dangling ceiling lights are like moons and such.
Yeah, when Eugene said restaurant, for some reason I was thinking of a dark restaurant where you can't see what's happening and you have a spoon. You don't know what spoon you're given. Maybe it has holes, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's small, maybe it's large. Good luck.
Did you guys? There's like an ad I saw on Instagram where it's like it's this experience where you blindfold yourself and you in a restaurant and then you eat the food.
I've been
supposed to be a surprise.
Yeah, I've been to one, and the intent was to bring awareness, I guess, to people with blindness. So essentially, you try and essentially live that dining experience through their disability, trying to reenact it by being in a very dark room, and it was kind of interesting too. All the waiters and waitresses in the restaurant are blind, like obviously legally blind. Honestly, that doesn't always mean you're fully blind. Sometimes it's visually impaired. Amazing how they can navigate in total darkness in a fairly crowded space too, so that's kind of impressive. But it makes the eating experience very confusing. Like you have no idea what you're being served. And that was part of the theme as well. But
yeah. Well, outside of restaurants and dining experiences, does anyone else anything that come to mind with a nebula and a spoon?
Nebula gives me such a strong astronomy or aerospace sort of vibe. So I definitely think that should be captured in the idea. It could be some sort of company that, you know how people will go on space tourism? So it's a space souvenir company where you get a spoonful of material from a celestial body.
Yeah.
It's like a teaspoon of lunar dust or Martian regolith.
Like you have the chocolate covered spoon sometimes you can buy as a souvenir, except it's all regolith. Don't try to eat it at home.
Certain people might want that souvenir, but the audience that you're catering to would have to be extremely wealthy because that's not cheap. No.
Yeah, I do like the idea of like the nebula being an abstract concept and a spoon being the idea of assembling things, that maybe seemingly not go together. I almost wonder if like those Amazon sort of like dropship boxes where you don't know what you're getting in there. Like it could be like a company that does presents for people and you don't know what to buy people for Christmas, for example. It's just like a random assortment of different presents, like fairly nebulous, and it's like.
My mind's going back to the whole, it's not original, but the whole algorithm kind of thing, like just trying to make sense of, maybe this could be something useful. It's just an abstract name for some sort of service or something for like data science. If you're trying to collect data and you're trying to, organize everything into neat little columns, trying to make sense of this amalgamation of data you somehow collected from like a data lake or something, as people call.
Yeah, actually, no, in terms of algorithms, even an algorithm that could sort of compile different databases. Let's say you may have different databases that do facial recognition or object recognition. Let's pick object recognition, but they're two very different. Your Nebula spoon maybe is able to take both and then sort of incorporate them into one giant database just to be able to retrieve information that's stored in different silos and kind of put that all together in one repository. That could be a good use. As many people are doing machine learning these days, that could be a useful case down the line just to have like, if you have a sort of fairly public and open repositories, that could be a good way to sort of collect them. Still like the souvenir one though.
Yeah.
It's kind of be a fun one when we get the space exploration days.
I was thinking like it could be a gimmick where kind of akin to how people would just lick peanut butter off of a spoon and you just scoop it up. What if you had like a spoon, like a lollipop kind of thing, but you sprinkle in like a moon dust or something? I
don't know if you should eat moon dust. I wouldn't advise that.
Or maybe something that looks like moon dust or something. Just allude to the whole idea of space with Nebula. Stardust sprinkles, but it's really just like citrus.
Yeah, it's like something, I don't know, chocolate, for example, that's being crumbled to look like jagged regolith or something.
Or it could be like a type of food that just looks sort of like space. That like has like the specific like combination of colors.
Restaurant with all space themed dishes. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
that could be it.
If you're Griffith Observatory, you better be taking notes right now.
Another thing that this makes me think of is perhaps like a spoon that can be used like an astrolabe for navigation. Like you hold it up to the sky and it's like transparent and you're like, oh yeah, that's the star. And that means I rotate the spoon. Okay, that's north. Okay, that's where I should go.
You have little perforations in your spoon so you can match it up to the exact constellation. Like, it lines up. That's the one.
Exactly.
Makes for a terrible spoon because it's got a hole in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I could be transparent with like, little, it's your survival spoon. You use it to find your way.
After the spork, you have the navigation spoon.
And you know how a spoon is curved, so you have like and if it's a lens, you have like a concave and a convex lens. Maybe if you flip the spoon, you can have different insights. You can observe something out in space. I don't know.
Now on the curved surface, I'm thinking like shields of sorts. It's I don't know how you tie into the nebula part, but protects you against everything, maybe.
A large spoon.
It's essentially a large spoon.
I think that's like a shovel.
Fair. I think the market's pretty saturated.
Yeah.
If you're going down that path of the spooning, maybe it's a in orbit catching and grappling, right? you're trying to spoon another
it's a
satellite.
spacecraft that spoons another
Yeah.
spacecraft to
Yeah,
like deorbit it or to
You do have people, trying to go on different docking schemes like self-docking and being able to grapple satellites. So maybe that's one of those companies could be Nebula Spoon.
Well, now that you brought up that like the space scope, I do wonder if Nebula Spoon could be the name of like an asteroid mining company.
Ooh,
Oh,
yeah,
that's an interesting-
yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, catch the asteroid. You're scooping it or spooning it.
Well, then you're digging into it.
Yeah,
Like,
you're like extracting
Oh,
minerals or
yeah.
anything in there.
That could be an excavator.
I was thinking, is there? So I would need the help of astronomy heads here, but like nebulas, they're nurseries for stars. That's where stars are born.
Mhm.
What about? Is there anything with nebulas, like any minerals or anything that they have that could be useful for people? I'm just leaning really heavy into the nebula, like asteroid mining company, but maybe you have a company that goes out and extracts material from a nebula. You need warp technology to get to your nearest nebula, but like I do wonder. This could be like a company founded in year 5000 or something.
For our listeners who are still around in 5,000 years.
This is proof that we made this idea 2,000 years in the future.
Yeah.
we deserve royalty.
Somewhere in the Earth's, giant repository for past human life, as the next generation of alien comes.
See, Pample Industries, we really played a long game here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of does open up that sidebar conversation where you do have a lot of space companies that are really looking into the future, but just the technology we have now kind of doesn't unlock their capabilities. Just say you have a lot of asteroid mining, but you have some companies that want to do asteroid mining, but we don't have like you have SpaceX with this launch capacity, but it's still kind of like limited to an extent. But still, you have the whole energy issue once you're still out in space, and having people operate in space for an extended periods of time. There's just still so much
Not to
unknown.
mention the difficulties in bringing back whatever you mine, assuming you
Yeah.
want to bring it back to Earth.
So something I've always had in my mind as well was, let's say you are an asteroid mining company. You can, depending on where you go back to take the minerals, you can probably only carry a certain amount of minerals. So if you go to a planet that has that's way larger than Earth, you can't carry probably too much with you in your spaceship because the force of gravity will just pull everything way more. Versus if you're an asteroid mining company going to the moon, you could probably get away with a lot more in your cargo hold, so to speak. Because I'm just imagining, because more mass, because mass has the part of the force of gravity pulling down on a planet. Bigger planet, larger force of gravity. That means less mass you can carry, like in your spacecraft if you're coming to descend as well.
Yeah, there's the sort of the economics part of it where the scarcity of whatever you're getting would have to warrant that it's worth getting there, right? If you had some theoretical element that you don't have here, maybe it warrants, the rocket equations tyranny. If you have something more common, then, you definitely would be constrained in either being more effective, whether that's cost effective or, well, I guess the ratio of mass you're bringing back to cost.
It would have to be really rare for it to not be worth the same amount of money to dig it up on Earth.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah,
Because
definitely.
we already have a way to get rocks out of the ground, at least for things that are abundant on Earth or even not very abundant.
Yeah, exactly.
But so it would have to be really something special or non-renewable or something of the sort.
Yeah. Something I think that would probably be more grounded and within the near future, aside from asteroid mining, could probably be orbital debris even. Like a spoon, you're just collecting all the scattered debris that's orbiting around the Earth. Nebula is still space related, but
spooning up on the debris. Maybe it's a giant net that goes and scoops it up.
I mean, there's a lot of ideas that people are throwing out there. How do you tackle orbital debris? Because that's still a very prevalent problem.
It's an important problem that is not getting better.
It's only going to get worse from here on out unless we do something about it.
Yeah, no, it could be a great debris deorbiting company name. Nebula Spoon.
Yeah. Well, on that note, if anyone here or anyone online has any ideas that they want to share, please don't forget to drop a comment. I think we had a lot of fun with this Nebula Spoon idea. We can probably revisit this at some point in the near future, but just leave a comment if you have an idea for the Nebula Spoon. We would love to listen to you. And if you have any ideas on how to address this week's big question about trying to foster a positive culture in your team, please share that as well. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
See ya.
Yeah.